Hi everyone. I'm Toby Turtle, the official mascot of STO Summit Spring 2025. We're excited to share the recorded sessions from the world's leading summit on security tokens and real-world assets. Now, let's dive into today's talk from one of our global leaders. Hey Augustine, over to you.
Please welcome Stephen Streetman, President of Streetsmart Investments, on tokenization for affordable housing.
Thank you very much, Augustine. And I appreciate the reaching out to me and inviting me to speak at this summit. It's been a very, very interesting day so far with a lot of incredibly knowledgeable speakers, and I hope that I can contribute something to that as well. Let me share my screen. So I assume everyone is seeing my screen. Let me know if you're not.
Yes, so. Okay.
So
Your
my name
screen
is
is okay.
Streetman. I actually got involved with cryptocurrency way back in 2017, which now seems like a long time ago. I traded cryptocurrency for real estate. I had to actually create the closing process, and I got very, very interested in all the synergies between cryptocurrency and real estate, and later published a book in 2021 on, surprisingly, cryptocurrency and real estate. Over the time, I've gotten very, very interested in tokenization. I've been an advisor to several companies in tokenization world, and I'm currently a consultant who works with people who are looking at doing particularly real estate STOs or real estate NFTs. I want to talk today, though, on a very, very specific aspect of tokenization, and that is tokenization for affordable housing. There are a lot of reasons to do a tokenization. We can just recreate a syndication. You can have fractional ownership of things. But we believe that there's a way of actually creating affordable housing by allowing fractional ownership. And so let me jump right into sort of a diagram of how we're looking to put this together. So the really interesting thing is that once you start using blockchain, you can have a whole lot more information about a property that is tracked and maintained than you have with traditional title records. So in this diagram, what you see at the bottom is your favorite blockchain. Everyone has their own favorite. And you can have a number of different records that are conveyed on the blockchain as transactions, because those are things that really need to be immutable. But it isn't just title. So you might convey title. You might also put a mortgage lien on. You might record a lease, have lien releases. There might be mechanics liens. There are a number of things that are really important to record that represent and impact the title of the actual property itself, which we're thinking of in this case as an NFT. Think of an NFT as something that is one token that holds title. And an STO would have a bunch of tokens that provide fractional ownership of title. And in this case, we were looking at both of them. But even with the ownership of the NFT, it isn't as simple as just title and property. Property can be very complex in the way that it's owned. One can just own the ground. One can just own the building. It's possible to just own the mineral rights underneath the building. It's possible to just own the air rights. And being able to divide those up is actually much simpler once you start recording these things in the blockchain, because the smart contracts can tell you exactly what's there. And it's really easy to tie these together into common NFTs so that it's all relatable. Try to do that today. If you go and look and say in Texas and you want to know if the mineral rights are owned by the property owner, it's a challenging thing to find out. But even beyond that, there's all kinds of information that can be attached to the NFT, which will help you understand the property and help you maintain the property over time. So obviously you can have a digital twin of the property. The location in GIS, for example, the exact GIS coordinates, not just of the survey around the property, but of where the actual homes and other structures are located. You can have images of the home. You can have the floor plans, including the as-built floor plans. For my own home, I tried to capture this information. I went through and I videotaped my walls when they put in the electrical and plumbing, but before they put up the drywall, thinking now I'll always know where those things are located, and I can't find the video. If I could find it, I wouldn't have anything I could play it on. So being able to store these things, especially with long-lasting structures, is really important. But you can also store any permits that are given by the property, any renovations that are done with the property, any tax issues and tax requirements. For a commercial property, you can store the performance information of the property, the income, the expenses, anything else like that. And of course, most importantly for this particular summit, you can fractionalize the ownership of that NFT using a security token offering. And so think of this now as the framework that we're looking at for holding title to a property. And I want to talk about how we can enable a new form of ownership by using this framework. And that form of ownership is something that we call stewardship. So stewardship is a blend of ownership, rent, and property management. So the person who is going to be the steward of the property is hired to manage the property and has obligations to maintain the property. This person will make a monthly payment, and that monthly payment goes partially towards buying additional ownership. So buying more of the fractional ownership tokens, these STOs, that represent ownership in the property. And then part of that goes to rent, and that rent pays a return to the capital provider who owns the rest of the fractional ownership of the property. So that the investor gets a return, the person who's living there gets gradual increase in ownership, and everyone is protected because they are obligated to maintain the property, and if they can be hired as a property manager, they can also be fired. What's really interesting to this, so the ownership and the rent works very similar to a traditional mortgage. So with a traditional mortgage, you own the property, the bank has a lien against the property, and every month you make a monthly payment. Some of that payment goes to pay down principal, which effectively provides you equity, assuming the price of the house stays the same. And some of that goes to pay interest, which works essentially like rent here. So the ownership and rent components work very similar to a traditional mortgage, except that you cannot have your equity lost to foreclosure, which is what happens today. If for some reason you decide to move or you're required to move, you must be paid for your equity. Now, stewardship has some really interesting advantages, and one of those is that all residents build equity. Today, at least in the US, if your income is here, if it's above here, you're an owner and you are paying down principal and you're gaining wealth in the property. And if your income is here, you're a renter and you never get anywhere. By using this other formula, all the residents are able to build some equity, even if you're starting with very, very little. So you no longer have this stark division between renters and owners. It's also possible, we're looking at this as a whole community, that ownership can be subsidized by local work in the community. So there are ways to assist people in making their ownership work and in paying their monthly payments. Obviously, I've mentioned before, equity cannot be lost to foreclosure. Equity must be paid, or if you transfer to a new property, move to a larger home, for example, the equity could be transferred directly to a new property as opposed to just made into cash and then cash into the property. So investors are incentivized to provide capital because they're receiving a return, which is really a very stable return in an asset class that a lot of investors really want to be involved in. And then they're also able to see that their income is protected through this property management component so that bad actors can be weeded out. But maybe most importantly, within the community, this builds an ownership culture. People who are owners of their property are more likely to take care of them. And so this extends that ownership culture to everyone in the community, as opposed to just the few whose income is larger than whatever you need to buy the home. Now, it's very unlikely that really any existing jurisdiction is going to create stewardship as a way of doing traditional ownership. So is there a way for us to do this now working within existing ownership structures. And I think the way to think of this is that stewardship is sort of like a layer 2 ownership structure, with the official recorded title at the county in the US or whatever the regional or national organization is in other countries being the layer 1. So ownership on layer 1 that's recorded with the state is effectively permanently fixed. It comes in, it's in a trust, it's in an LLC, it is in a nonprofit, whatever makes sense in the local jurisdiction. That ownership is there, it won't change. So it becomes really a layer where there's no activity and nothing to change from one time to the next. The stewardship is tracked solely in the blockchain, and you have the NFTs, single ownership, and the STOs, fractional ownership, publicly maintained on the blockchain. In addition, obviously, to the transactions that are there, we're maintaining information about the property as well. Now, obviously, we're still going to follow all the laws and rules for security offerings for the STOs. In our particular case, especially in the US, we may need to lock up tokens for a year before we can really release them to individual owners who are not accredited. It will depend on the particular securities exemption that we follow in order to create the STO. And of course, all laws for real estate title are followed, but they really become irrelevant because you're not really changing the real estate title at all. So this, really the benefits of this stewardship are that you can now have everyone become an owner. You can track all the ownership on the blockchain, and you have a much richer set of data about the properties being on the ownership. Now, this sounds like a kind of a cool idea and an interesting theory, but what really happens is when it meets the real world, how can we do this in real life? And I'd like to introduce to you all the Jevity project. It's an agile regenerative community. We are actually building a new town. So it's going to be called Jevity, Texas. It's in the Austin, Texas metro area. And this town is essentially a self-sufficient community that we're building. It will have its own power, its own water, its own waste, its own sewer, its own recycling, its own food production, and some of its own manufacturing. So it will be as self-sufficient as you really can make a community these days. We're planning to build the homes using 3D printing and a hemp mixture, which we think is going to be very beautiful homes because we can build curvilinear homes instead of straight-lined homes. And we can build it faster and cheaper and longer lasting than traditional construction. So all that's kind of cool. But for this summit, the important side of the technologies that we're bringing to bear in this regenerative community are the tokenization and governance. So we believe that this is going to be the first town where title of every structure is on the blockchain. And in fact, title of every structure will be a security token offering so that fractional ownership is enabled for every structure, every home, every commercial building, all the infrastructure, everything. So we believe we're going to be the first on this. Perhaps we're not, but I haven't seen one yet. So within this, one of our goals is to make certain that anybody who works in our community can afford to live in our community. That's a real problem in the United States, and I believe it's a problem in other parts of the world as well, that people are priced out of the neighborhoods where they work. So we certainly intend to build a range of sizes of homes, everything from tiny homes to luxury homes, and some of those maybe also be apartments and condos. But we are convinced that through this approach to affordable housing, that we will be able to have everyone have some amount of ownership in the place where they live, and that if they work in the community, they will be able to live in the community. So I've talked a little bit about the stewardship strategy. So to kind of wind this up, we're looking at a very unusual way of looking at the tokenization. We're trying to do tokenization not so much to provide global access to the tokens, but to enable hyper-local access to the residents who live there. And if you're interested in learning more about the Jevity project, you can connect with me and my LinkedIn. And then my book, Cryptocurrency and Real Estate, is available on Amazon. And a brand new audiobook has just come out on that. So I didn't have one until just a couple of weeks ago, but now there's an audiobook that reads it as well. And I think that kind of does it for me. If I'm open for questions, if there are any questions. I believe I'm a little bit early in completing this.
Thanks for joining us at STO Summit Spring 2025. Stay curious, stay connected, and remember, the future is tokenized.